Alarka ran east with the cudgel in her hand and the wrong-ringing bells beating the night into splinters. Ashmarket lay beyond the lanes she knew best, beyond the better-lit courts near the hall, beyond the low bridge where the rainwater always gathered black along the curb. She ran through wet torch glow and chimney smoke, through streets where doors had begun to open and faces leaned into the dark to ask what had happened, where was the fire, what quarter, whose child, whose house. She shouldered between men hurrying in the same direction and women dragging them back by the sleeves. She struck one gawking apprentice flat-handed in the chest when he blocked the alley mouth to stare. Move. He stumbled aside without even cursing. The bell did that to people. Not the proper stroke of a fire alarm, not the deep measured calling of a temple hour. This was frantic, uneven, a bell handled by fear. It clanged, faltered, clanged again, each burst seeming to come from a different height in the city because panic made direction uncertain. Somewhere another bell had begun answering it in confused sympathy, and the sounds jarred against one another like broken gears. Water splashed up her shins. The lane underfoot was slick with old mud and fresh rain. A dog bolted across her path. Someone shouted behind her for a sister, a wife, a boy who had gone to look. Torchlight leaped along timber walls and vanished. The city narrowed eastward, the better stone giving way to patched fronts, jutting upper stories, sheds built against older sheds, stairways added crooked as afterthoughts. Ashmarket had once been a proper place of trade, with weighing courts and bonded stores and guild houses meant to endure. Then trade shifted. Fire took one side, neglect the other, and the quarter became a body living on scars. The old civic remnants remained in blackened fragments among the timber, a flight of stone steps leading nowhere, a scale emblem over a bricked arch, a warehouse lintel too grand for the rooms now huddled around it. She knew the way by instinct more than memory. The old chapel louver had gone to lay beyond the tallow stalls and the crumbling wayhouse through a lane so narrow that carts had to back out if they entered wrong. She had walked him only as far as the market arch. Not far enough, the thought ran with her, keeping pace. Not far enough. She cut left through a passage under a leaning gallery. The planks above groaned beneath the feet of people rushing overhead. A woman seized her sleeve as she emerged. "Guard, is it fire?" Alarka tore free. "What happened?" "I heard there's an outsider at the bell," but Alarka was already gone. Her breath was raw in her throat. The cold air had ceased to feel cold. Her body knew only movement now. The stretch and strike of her legs, the slap of wet leather, the hammer of blood. Faces flashed and vanished. A cooper from the lower market. 2 boys from the dyer's lane, wide-eyed with ugly excitement. A man in a wool cap, carrying a length of rope, who looked at her and then away too quickly. Rope. Her mind snagged on it and skidded onward. At the top of Stave Court, a pair of watchmen were coming the other way. Not running, but hurrying in that cautious, infuriating manner of men already preparing excuses. One held a lantern high, the other had his cudgel out but his chin tucked. "Where?" Alarka shouted before they could speak. The lantern jerked east. Old Wayhouse Yard. She did not wait for more. Now she could hear voices under the bells. Not a single cry, not the ordinary scattered quarrel of a poor district, but a crowd's sound. Many throats joined by one object, uncertain whether it wanted justice, punishment, or entertainment, and so making a noise fit for all three. It rolled up and broke along the lane ahead of her. Torches threw orange over wet boards. Smoke gathered low beneath the eaves. Somewhere a child was crying because children always cried when adults taught the night how to hate. Alarka hit the mouth of the Wayhouse lane at speed and nearly drove straight into the press of bodies. The crowd had swelled to fill the crooked yard and half the lane besides. Men in work aprons, women with shawls thrown over nightclothes, 2 soldiers in off-duty jackets, a baker's boy, a carter she recognized from the lower bridge. The sacristan from some little chapel, grey-faced and wringing his hands without once stepping forward. A man held a torch too high and close to the eaves, careless as if a whole quarter had not burned once already for less. Others craned necks or stood on barrels. A few were trying to leave now that the deed was done, and found themselves trapped by the same bodies that had brought them. Those at the back were asking what had happened. Those at the front were staring. For one bewildered heartbeat, Alarka saw only fragments, wet shoulders, the old weighhouse beam jutting black above the yard, a rope hanging from it, a spill of tools glinting in the mud, the brass face of a chapel clock half unwrapped and trampled underfoot. Then the bodies shifted, and she saw Luva. He hung from the weighing beam where merchants had once suspended grain loads and casks to settle disputes over measures. The old iron hook was gone, but the crossbeam remained, black with age and swollen by weather. They had thrown the rope over it. They had tied it badly, in haste, with the clumsy certainty of men who had not expected to be questioned. His body had turned slightly to one side. One foot still brushed the face of the weighhouse post, as if there remained some ordinary ground to find. His hands. It was his hands that struck her first, even before the face. One had clenched on nothing. The other hung open, fingers curled a little inward, stained dark at the knuckles where someone had stepped on them or dragged him. Those were Luva's hands, hands that set springs and polished brass, hands that had lifted a twist of fig paper to share with her on the river stair, hands that had touched the bruise beneath her sleeve with such care it might have undone her if she had let it. Then his face turned a fraction in the wavering torchlight, recognizable, unmistakable, not some ruin that mercy could call anonymous. Luva. His dark hair had come loose across his brow. One cheek was smeared with mud. There was bruising already at the throat above the rope. His mouth had fallen open slightly. His golden yellow eyes, which had startled children and unsettled cowards and met hers 1,000 times with patient humour, were open to nothing. The world did not stop. That was the first obscenity of it. The bells still rang. Someone nearby was breathing beer through his nose. A woman said, "Saints preserve us," with more fascination than grief. Torch smoke stung Alarka's eyes, and the yard kept all its noises, as though Luva's death were only one more thing the city had found room to contain. She drove into the crowd. People cursed as she shoved them aside. A shoulder under her arm, an elbow in a rib, a shove hard enough to send a man sprawling into the mud. The cudgel struck someone's wrist and went spinning from her hand, forgotten before it landed. She heard her own voice, but not the words at first, only the shape of them, raw and tearing. Down. Get him down. No one moved. Then a voice said, he was tampering with the bell. Another, eager to justify itself. The sacristan caught him at the chapel. He had tools. He ran. He didn't run, someone else said. Too low, too late. They seized him. A woman with her shawl crooked around one shoulder said, "My niece saw the yellow mark on the wall this morning, same as by Bellmaker's Rise. He was one of them. One of them. One of what? A man carrying springs and a clock face through the rain. A man too polite for his own safety. A man who bought stale bread so as not to trouble the baker's pride." Alarka reached the foot of the beam and caught Luva around the legs, lifting by pure reflex, absurdly, as if that could give him breath back. He was still warm through the soaked cloth, warm enough that denial rose whole and terrible in her. "Knife!" she shouted. "Get me a knife!" No one answered. The rope bit deeper as she heaved upward. His weight was wrong. Human weight always was. It asked too much. She braced her shoulder against his knees and looked wildly around. There were watchmen there, after all, two from some nearer post, one with his badge half hidden under his cloak, as though that might excuse him from being seen. Neither had gone near the beam. One kept saying to the crowd, "Stand back! Stand back!" with the empty voice of a man who had lost control before he began, and did not wish to say so. Alarka rounded on him, cut him down. The watchman's face was grey. We came when the bell cut him down. He may have, she made a sound, so full of hatred that he flinched. A ladder lay against the wayhouse wall, abandoned beside a stack of cracked casks. She dragged it with one hand, while still straining upward under Luva's weight with the other shoulder. A cooper stepped forward then, half-heartedly, perhaps stung by being watched, and helped right it against the beam. Another man backed away, crossing himself in the lamplight. "Don't touch the rope," he said. "If there's curse work." Alarka turned and would have killed him with her bare hands if the next instant had not been stolen by a face in the crowd. The bandaged-handed soldier from the cinder lamp stood 3 paces back with torchlight on one cheek and rain still dark in the wool of his jacket. She knew him at once by the wrap across his right hand and by the ugly composure with which he held himself. He was not the most frenzied there. That was what marked him. Others looked shocked by what they had helped do. He looked as a man looks after driving a nail, breathing harder, perhaps, but satisfied the work was done. He was saying to those nearest him, "We kept him from the chapel till proper men came. Better this than let such filth loose in the quarter. Ask the sacristan." The sacristan, white-lipped, did not answer. "You call this keeping?" Alarka said. His eyes found her. Recognition flickered, then a defensive hardening. He laid hands on consecrated work. He was repairing a clock. That's what they all say when caught. All who. He spread his good hand toward the rope as if the body itself settled the matter. "You saw the marks in the streets. You heard the talk. Bell wrong, child fevered, shrine oil fouled. Then this one, out after dark with iron and tools, and those eyes, those eyes." He said it as if he named a weapon. Behind him a woman cried suddenly, "No one said to hang him," and burst into tears. A man hissed at her to be silent. Another muttered. He struck Derrin first. Another, only when they grabbed his bag. Contradictions everywhere. Piling into a structure no one wanted to examine because it already held a corpse. Alarka climbed 2 rungs of the ladder and reached for the knot above Luva's neck. Her fingers slipped on wet rope. She looked down once more. Luva's face was inches from hers now, mud on his cheek. A small cut at the brow. Rainwater or tears dried in a line near one ear, impossible to know which. His eyes, open and unseeing, still held their strange gold in the torchlight, dulled but not extinguished enough to become ordinary. She had never imagined he could look at nothing. She put her left palm against his jaw in a movement so intimate it was almost hidden by desperation. "Luva," she said. Nothing. His throat showed where the rope had crushed the skin. She knew before she truly knew. Warm did not mean alive. Stillness did not always mean death. But this did. This did. Something inside her gave way without breaking. It simply ceased to believe that the next instant could mend what the last had done. She came down from the ladder not carefully but all at once, stumbling the final rung. The yard reeled. Torch smoke, wet wood, the rust smell of old iron, the muttering crowd, all of it sharpened until each thing stood separate and intolerable. Her sight fixed not on the rope now, nor on the watchman, nor on the sacristan wringing his hands, but on the bandaged-handed soldier who had spoken as though murder were a civic duty performed untidily. He saw her coming and set his feet. Perhaps he thought she meant to accuse him. Perhaps he thought to defend himself with words, to say again that there had been rumours, that he had only held the man, that no one intended it, that the crowd got away. Perhaps he meant to raise his hands and call for order. She would never know. Grief had shortened the world to a single distance and a single target. She crossed it in 3 strides. "You did this," she said. His mouth opened. He was one of. Alarka struck him with her right fist, not skillfully, not like a watchwoman laying on a lesson, not measured, not even well balanced. She hit him the way an ordinary woman hits the man who stands nearest the body of the person she loved. With all the force of a life splitting, her knuckles met his jaw, and something older than bone answered. The blow did not land. It detonated. A white gold flash burst from the point of contact so violently that for an instant the whole yard became a negative of itself. Beam, rope, faces, ladder, torches, rain-slick boards, every line cut in searing light. The sound followed not like a shout, but like the sky breaking at arm's length, a thunderclap inside the bones, inside the teeth, inside the wet wood of the wayhouse. Men dropped where they stood. Torches flew from hands. Somebody screamed that the bell had burst. Somebody else screamed a prayer. The soldier left the ground. He was not merely knocked backward. The force took him as though the air itself had become a hammer. His body snapped away from her, arms flung wide, boots clearing the mud, and crashed into the press behind him hard enough to throw two others down. He struck the post of a market awning, shattered it, and disappeared beneath a tangle of collapsing timber and bodies. The crowd broke in all directions. Some ran shrieking from divine wrath. Some fell to their knees. Some stared at Alarka as if a god had stepped out through her skin. Others surged backward in blind animal panic, trampling dropped baskets, spilled tallow, the brass clock face in the mud. One watchman lost hold of his lantern and stamped frantically to keep the flame from catching. The sacristan cried, "Mercy, mercy," to no one in particular. Alarka did not see any of it clearly for the first half heartbeat after the blast, because the light had gone inward. It had gone through her arm. Pain hit with a delay so brief it was almost one thing with the flash. Her right hand ceased to be a hand. Her forearm became a shaft of white fire packed with nails. She heard, or felt, the crack of her own bones, not as separate sounds but as a splintering through flesh. Her fingers spasmed open. She staggered back, staring stupidly at the ruin at the end of her sleeve, as if it belonged to someone else. Then the pain fully arrived, and the yard dropped to its knees around her. She screamed. Her right arm hung wrong from the elbow down, the line of it mangled beneath skin already swelling, the wrist buckled, the hand trembling with involuntary convulsions. Heat and cold warred there together. She clutched it with her left arm, and nearly fainted from the second wave that followed the first. The world throbbed with afterlight. Her ears rang. Every bell in the city seemed trapped inside her skull, each striking a different hour. She sank to one knee in the mud. Around her, voices came back in pieces. "Saints, what was that?" she blasted him. "Curseth guard us. No, 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 get away from her. She killed Darren. Is he dead? Don't touch her." The name fixed itself through the ringing. Darren. So the soldier had one after all. Darren, who had mocked table service at the tavern and then found a mob willing to put courage where his prejudice had been. Darren, now, somewhere, under broken timber and groaning men, or not groaning at all. Alarka bent over her arm, breath tearing in and out. She could not close her right hand. She could barely feel which fingers were hers. The sleeve was tightening as swelling rose beneath it. Nothing made sense except one thing, one fact, standing immovable behind all the pain. Luva still hung from the beam. She lifted her head. The rope was still there. Luva's body was still there. The flash had not touched him. No divine hand had undone the knot. No bell had reversed. The world, which had just shattered itself to answer her rage, had not spent an ounce of that force to save the man who needed saving. Something like hatred, directionless and immense, opened beneath her ribs. A woman was backing away, making the sign of the scales over and over with shaking fingers. A butcher's apprentice had fallen on his backside and was crab-crawling through the mud without taking his eyes off Alarka. The two watchmen stood rooted, every piece of training stripped from them by fear. One whispered, "Blessed judge, with no reverence in it at all. From the lane mouth came the hard ringing of iron-shod hooves, and a command spoken so cleanly it cut through the chaos before the speaker himself appeared. "Make way." No one obeyed at first. Then the rider came into sight, and obedience found them. He wore a dark travel cloak over armor, made for use rather than spectacle, blackened plates at shoulder and breast over mail, the edges worn bright where long service had polished them, rain beaded on the steel. At his throat hung a seal of black iron in the shape of balanced scales crossed by a straight blade. His horse, foam-flecked and broad-chested, checked hard in the lane, and the man was out of the saddle before the animal had settled, one gloved hand on the bridle, the other already drawing the short, heavy-backed sword at his side. He took in the yard in a glance, the hanging body on the beam, the broken crowd, the collapsed awning where Darren lay moaning once, wetly, then not again, the torch on the ground guttering near spilled tallow, the two useless watchmen, the kneeling woman with a ruined arm and light still dying in the air around her. "Stamp that out," he said to the nearest bystander, not raising his voice. Now, the man obeyed as if struck. Others did too. Command moved before fear could decide whether it approved. The newcomer handed the reins to no one in particular, and somehow a boy caught them. Then he stepped into the yard proper, boots splashing mud, cloak dragging rainwater. "Watch," he said without looking at the two men. "You will close both ends of this lane and hold anyone who tries to flee. If you cannot do that, remove those badges before I tear them off you." Something in his tone reached whatever courage, shame had left them. They moved. He went first, not to Alarka, not to the injured ringleader, but to the beam. His sword flashed once, not a dramatic arc, only a precise economy. He mounted the lower rungs of the ladder, caught Luva's body with his free arm before the cut, and severed the rope near the knot. He bore the weight down carefully, with the practiced strength of a man who had carried the dead before and knew that reverence begins in handling. The crowd, which had been capable of looking at a hanging man a moment earlier, now turned its faces away as if ashamed to be seen by the act of mercy. Alarka tried to stand and nearly blacked out. Pain stripped the motion from her legs. The armoured man had already lowered Luva to the mud, on the least foul patch available, and knelt. He pressed 2 fingers at the throat. He looked once at the eyes. He did not lie. His head bowed a fraction. When he spoke, it was to no one, and to everyone. Too late. The words entered Alarka like cold iron. She crawled the last pace to Luva. No one stopped her. The armoured man shifted back on his heels to let her in, studying her with a gaze far too level to be curious and far too grave to be ordinary. She did not notice him properly then. Her whole being narrowed again to the body before her. Luva lay on his side where they had lowered him, one arm pinned beneath him awkwardly, the other outstretched across the mud, and scattered brass fragments from the broken clock face. His cloak had twisted beneath his back. The rope mark stood livid around his throat. A bruise was rising at his temple. His lips were parted as if he might yet draw a careful breath and apologize for the trouble. He did not. Alarka set her left hand against his cheek. Rainwater and mud cooled her palm, but under it his skin still held the fading residue of life. Not warmth enough, never enough. She pushed hair back from his brow with fingers that would not stop shaking. His eyes were open. She had seen the dead before. In taverns after stabbings, in alleys after beatings, in watch cells when fever outran the healer. She knew the difference between a gaze turned inward by thought and a gaze emptied beyond recall. Yet she could not bear it in him. With clumsy gentleness she closed his eyes. Her ruined right arm pulsed and screamed each time her body shifted. She scarcely felt it. "You said directly," she whispered. Nobody in the yard could have heard her, but the man kneeling opposite. "Directly," she said again, as if the word itself might become a road backward if spoken correctly. "You said directly." Her thumb found the edge of one of his fingers. There was oil still lodged faintly beneath the nail from work at the shop. A little cut crossed his knuckle where metal had slipped some day before. That cut undid her more than the rope had. It was so ordinary. A living man's small injury carried into death because no one had left him time to acquire another. The sound that came from her then was not a scream. It was lower, rougher, the voice of grief too full to fit through a throat cleanly. She bowed over him, left hand fisted in his cloak, forehead nearly touching the mud by his shoulder. The armoured man let the moment stand. Then the yard forced itself back upon them. "Sir, sir." He struck first. "They were saying the child had the fever after I told them wait for the magistrate. I never laid a hand on him." The man rose. When he straightened to his full height, the crowd quieted in stages, each voice dying as its owner realized he had become the object of another sort of attention. He turned first toward the collapsed awning where men were dragging the ringleader clear. Darren still lived. His jaw hung at a wrong angle. Blood ran from one ear. He made a choked sound when they touched him and then went limp again. "You," the armoured man said to the bystanders handling him. "Lay him flat. Do not move his neck." They obeyed. Only then did he face the crowd at large. "I am Markiah of the Order of Curseth," he said. No flourish, no sermon. Only a fact set down like a blade on wood. The seal at his throat caught the torchlight black iron scales, severe and unmistakable. Even in Ashmarket people knew that sign. The order did not fill the streets. One saw its knights in processions on high feast days, at tribunals, at royal musters perhaps, at border levies in wartime. They belonged to the realm's harder institutions, those black stone corridors where judgment was pronounced and sentence carried. To see one in a timber yard slick with mud and panic felt like seeing a tower walk. Markiah's gaze moved over them. "No one leaves." A cooper swallowed. "Sir," there was confusion, rumour of shrine defilement. "We thought, you thought to hang a man from a market beam." He touched the chapel bell. "He was hired to repair the chapel clock," someone said from the back, desperate now to separate themselves from the front. "Nirana's apprentice. Everyone knows him." Not everyone had cared to know him half an hour earlier. Markiah looked toward the sacristan, who had gone so white the skin around his lips seemed blue. "Did you summon him?" The sacristan opened and closed his mouth. Yes. The clock was losing time, but the bell was wrong, and he had tools." And people were already saying, "So you accused him." "I said only that he ought to wait for the watch." Markiah's gaze shifted to the two watchmen barring the lane mouth. "And you?" One of them, the older, lifted his chin with an effort that resembled drowning. "We arrived to find a crowd assembled. We were attempting to keep order until reinforcements." Markiah cut him off. "You kept order while they hanged him?" The watchman had no answer at all. The yard heard its own silence. A woman near the front began to sob again. "No one meant." "No one?" Markiah said. That landed harder than a shout would have. "No one," answered. Torches hissed in the damp. Water dripped from the beam. Somewhere far off, a bell had finally stopped. Another still tolled uncertainly, ashamed of its own persistence. Markiah turned back to Alarka then, and crouched beside her. Up close, he looked younger than his authority first suggested, and older than his face allowed, perhaps near 40, perhaps less, worn by discipline rather than age. Rain darkened the hair at his temples. A scar crossed one brow and disappeared into the hairline. His eyes were grey, very steady. "Look at me," he said. She did not want to. She wanted the yard emptied, the beam burned, the crowd flayed by something as vast as the force that had just come through her arm. She wanted Luva to breathe. Instead she lifted her face because his tone left no room for waste. His gaze went at once to her right arm. He did not touch it yet. "How long since the blast?" he asked. The word meant nothing to her. He answered himself. "Moments." Her arm throbbed in horrible separate beats. Bone moved where bone should not. She had wrapped it against her body with her left hand, holding it still by desperation alone. Sweat chilled her neck despite the night air. Her vision had begun to pulse dark at the edges. "What did you do to me?" she asked. He considered that, then said, "I did nothing." "Then what?" "Later." He looked once toward Luva's body, and something in his expression altered, not softened exactly, but sharpened into grief held under rule. He understood the shape of this night. That much was plain. He returned his attention to her arm. "The bones are broken through the hand and forearm," he said. "If I do not bind them now, you may lose the use of it entirely." She almost laughed at the absurdity. Use, as if there were a world left that still arranged itself around usefulness. "Instead," she said, "help him." Markaya's face did not change. "I cannot." The words had the same implacable truth as the earlier "too late." They were intolerable because they were not cruel. "I can still keep the arm," he said. "Listen carefully. This will not restore it. Not here. Not now. I can knit enough to stop the worst of the damage, hold the bones, and keep the hand viable if you obey afterward. It will hurt. It already hurts. This will hurt differently." She could barely think around the pain. Behind him the crowd murmured again, quieter now, cowed by his presence, by the broken man under the awning, by the hanging rope cut from the beam and lying in the mud like a dead snake. Someone had started gathering dropped torches, someone else retched by the wall. Markaya removed one gauntlet and set it aside. His right hand was broad, the fingers scarred at the joints, the palm cross-hatched by old sword and labour marks both. Not a priest's decorative hand, a working one. A hand that had held reins, blades, liturgy, and wounds in turn. He drew from beneath his cloak a strip of black cloth, marked at intervals with tiny sewn iron scales. From a pouch at his belt he took a narrow iron rod the length of a finger, etched with minute characters that caught the light like lines of frost. He met her gaze once more. "If you faint, let it happen," he said. Then he laid 2 fingers just above the break at her wrist. The first touch alone nearly made her vomit. She jerked, but his grip tightened with controlled force. He slid the black cloth beneath her arm and wrapped it from palm to elbow with swift, economical motions, not sparing her pain because speed was mercy here. The iron rod he set along the underside where the bones had buckled. Each movement was exact. He had done this before, not to her, to soldiers perhaps, to pilgrims crushed under wheels, to fellow knights with shattered hands. Emergency had its own liturgy. He bowed his head once, not in display but in concentration, and spoke. The words were not loud. They were old enough to sound as though language had learned discipline before ornament. Alarka did not know them. She heard iron in them, measure, closure, the setting of weight upon a scale. With each phrase the black cloth darkened as if drinking shadow. Heat seeped from Markaya's palm into her arm, not the wild white violence of the blast, but a contained, terrible heat. Like metal fresh from the forge, pressed through skin to meet the broken places underneath. Then the bones moved. Not all at once, not with the neatness of story. They ground, drew, set. The hand that had been a ruin became a field of separate agonies forced into alignment by will not her own. She cried out, not able to stop it. Something cracked again, deeper this time, but in correction. Markaya's jaw tightened. Sweat stood out along his brow, though the night was cold. His left hand braced her elbow. His right held the liturgy in place. Light leaked through the folds of the cloth, not bright, not blinding, but a stern, dull gold, the colour of a bell after long use, of justice imagined as metal rather than flame. The light traced the lines of her wrist, pooled in the hollows between her knuckles, then sank. At the worst of it she felt every finger separately, each bone finding and being found. The ulnar and radius, though she did not know their names, became not pain but shape again. Splinters seemed to draw toward one another under a pressure that was also command. Nausea washed over her. The yard tilted. She might have fallen if Markiah had not already anticipated it, shoulder braced to keep her upright. Then, as suddenly as a door barred, the process stopped. The pain did not vanish. It changed. The wild shattering was gone, replaced by a deep grinding ache and a throbbing weakness so profound it felt like absence. Her hand lay swaddled in the black cloth from knuckles to below the elbow, stiff now with set force. She could not move the fingers without a lance of warning through the whole arm. Yet the bones no longer floated loose inside her. She felt dimly their terrible new coherence. Markiah released a slow breath. "It is bound," he said. "Not healed. Bound. Do you understand me?" She was shaking too hard to answer at once. He waited. "Yes," she said, though she understood almost nothing. "You will not strike with it. You will not lift with it. You will not test it because pain lessened and you think the matter done. If you do, I cannot promise the hand." The hand! Luva's hands. Her hand. The words tangled. Markiah wrapped the remaining length of cloth around the binding and knotted it with soldierly finality. Then he picked up his gauntlet and stood. Only now did his gaze rest fully on her face, and something in it deepened into certainty. "Look at your palm," he said. She stared at him blankly. "Your left hand," he said, as if obeying in a dream. She opened. The hand she had not known was clenched against Luva's cloak. Mud streaked the skin. Blood, perhaps hers, perhaps not, stained the heel of the palm. And there, burned faintly into the flesh, as if from pressure no metal had made, lay the outline of a tiny scale balanced over a straight, descending line. Not cut, not inked. A mark risen from beneath. She closed her fist at once. Markiah had seen enough. "Yes," he said softly, and the word held no wonder, only grave recognition. "He has taken you." "Who?" But she knew.